At the dawn of the 20th century, San Francisco stood as one of the most dynamic and prosperous cities in the United States. Perched on the edge of the Pacific Ocean, the city was a gateway between America and Asia, a center of commerce, finance, and culture. Long before the earthquake of 1906 would transform it into ruins, San Francisco embodied ambition, growth, and modern urban life. Founded during the California gold rush of the mid-19th century, San Francisco experienced explosive growth in a remarkably short period of time. By 1906, the city's population had surpassed 400,000 inhabitants, making it the largest city on the West Coast. Its harbor bustled with ships carrying goods and people from around the world. Railroads connected the city to the interior of the continent, cementing its role as a commercial hub. The city's physical layout reflected both opportunity and vulnerability. San Francisco was built on a series of hills and reclaimed land, with neighborhoods rising steeply from the waterfront. Streets were narrow in many districts, and buildings were often constructed close together. While these features contributed to the city's distinctive character, they also created conditions that would later amplify destruction. Architecturally, San Francisco was a mix of old and new. Wooden structures from the gold rush era stood alongside newer brick and stone buildings. Hotels, theaters, banks, and government buildings showcased modern design and ambition. Yet much of the city's construction was poorly regulated. Building codes were inconsistent, and seismic considerations were largely absent. Few structures were designed to withstand strong ground motion. The city's infrastructure mirrored this imbalance between progress and preparedness. Water mains, gas lines, and electrical systems crisscrossed beneath the streets with little redundancy. Firefighting resources, though extensive by contemporary standards, were vulnerable to disruption. San Francisco relied heavily on its water system to combat fires, a dependency that would prove disastrous. Economically, San Francisco was thriving. Banking and finance dominated the downtown district. Manufacturing, shipping, and warehousing lined the waterfront. Immigrant communities contributed to a diverse labor force, fueling industry and trade. Chinatown, one of the largest Chinese communities outside Asia, was a vibrant cultural center, though it faced discrimination and overcrowding. Despite its prosperity, the city existed atop a complex and poorly understood geological foundation. The San Andreas Fault, which runs through California, had not yet been fully mapped or scientifically explained. Earthquakes were known phenomena, but their causes and potential severity were not widely understood. Seismic risk was not a central concern in urban planning or public policy. Minor earthquakes had occurred in the region before 1906, reinforcing a sense of complacency. These tremors caused limited damage and were often regarded as nuisances rather than warnings. Few imagined that a single seismic event could devastate an entire metropolis. Daily life in San Francisco before the earthquake was marked by confidence and optimism. Newspapers celebrated economic growth and technological advancement. Social life revolved around theaters, restaurants, and public gatherings. The city was preparing to host international exhibitions, eager to present itself as a modern global center. The absence of serious disaster planning reflected broader attitudes of the era. Emergency response systems were rudimentary. Coordination between civil authorities, fire departments, and military forces was informal at best. The possibility of widespread urban destruction had not been seriously contemplated. Geographically, San Francisco's location amplified its risks. Built on a peninsula, the city was surrounded by water on three sides. Reclaimed land along the waterfront was especially unstable, composed of loose fill rather than solid bedrock. Neighborhoods built on these areas were particularly vulnerable to ground failure. Social inequalities also shaped the city's resilience. Wealthier districts were often located on more stable ground and featured sturdier construction. Poorer communities lived in overcrowded conditions, frequently in older wooden buildings more susceptible to collapse and fire. In the early hours of April 18, 1906, San Francisco was a city asleep, unaware that decades of growth had created a fragile urban system. Beneath the streets, stress had been accumulating along the San Andreas Fault for centuries. When that stress was finally released, the consequences would be catastrophic. The San Francisco of 1906 was not merely a backdrop for disaster. It was a product of its time, a city built rapidly, driven by ambition, and unprepared for the forces beneath it. Its strengths would soon be tested, and its weaknesses exposed. Before the earthquake, San Francisco represented the promise of the American West. Within minutes, that promise would be shattered. In the early morning hours of Wednesday, April 18, 1906, San Francisco lay quiet. Most of the city's residents were asleep, unaware that the geological forces beneath them were on the verge of release. At 5:12 a.m., without warning, the accumulated strain along the San Andreas Fault was suddenly unleashed, sending violent seismic waves through the city and surrounding regions. The initial shock was abrupt and overwhelming. Buildings shook violently, walls cracked, and streets buckled. Within seconds, the ground motion intensified, transforming ordinary structures into collapsing hazards. The shaking lasted less than a minute, yet its impact was profound. Entire blocks were destroyed almost instantly. Eyewitness accounts described the sensation as chaotic and disorienting. People were thrown from their beds, furniture overturned, chimneys toppled, crashing through roofs and into streets below. Brick facade crumbled, and wooden structures twisted under the strain. The noise of the earthquake, a combination of collapsing buildings, breaking glass, and the roar of the earth itself, was described as deafening. The earthquake's epicenter lay just offshore near the San Andreas Fault, and its effects were felt across a wide area of Northern California. Communities as far away as Sacramento and Los Angeles reported tremors. In San Francisco, the intensity of the shaking varied by location, with districts built on reclaimed land experiencing particularly severe damage. Downtown San Francisco was hit hard. Commercial buildings collapsed, trapping occupants beneath rubble. Hotels, theaters, and office buildings suffered extensive structural failure. The city's infrastructure was immediately compromised. Water mains burst, gas lines ruptured, and electrical systems failed. In many areas, streets split open, exposing underground pipes and cables. As the shaking subsided, a stunned silence followed. Survivors emerged cautiously from damaged buildings, unsure whether further shocks would follow. Dust filled the air, reducing visibility. Fires began to break out almost immediately, sparked by ruptured gas lines and overturned stoves. In the absence of functioning water mains, these fires quickly grew beyond control. Communication systems were crippled. Telegraph and telephone lines were severed, isolating the city from the outside world. City officials struggled to assess the scale of the disaster. With limited information and damaged transportation routes, coordination became nearly impossible. The San Francisco Fire Department faced an unprecedented crisis. Fire stations themselves had been damaged, and many firefighters were injured or killed. Equipment was buried beneath rubble. Most critically, the water supply was largely unavailable due to broken mains. Firefighters could do little more than watch as flames spread from building to building. In residential neighborhoods, families gathered in streets and open spaces, fearing aftershocks. Many carried only what they could grab in moments of panic. Hospitals and medical facilities were overwhelmed almost immediately. Doctors and nurses worked under extreme conditions, often without proper supplies or functioning facilities. The earthquake exposed stark contrast across the city. Wealthier neighborhoods with sturdier construction fared somewhat better, while poorer districts suffered disproportionately. In Chinatown, densely packed wooden buildings collapsed and burned rapidly, trapping residents and complicating rescue efforts. Military installations in the region also felt the impact. Army units stationed nearby were mobilized as communication permitted. However, the scale of the destruction exceeded anything previously experienced in an American city. There was no established protocol for responding to such a disaster. As morning light revealed the extent of the damage, it became clear that San Francisco had been fundamentally altered. Entire neighborhoods lay in ruins. Landmarks were reduced to rubble. The city's economy, infrastructure, and social fabric were shattered in a matter of moments. Aftershocks continued throughout the day, further destabilizing damaged structures and fueling fear among survivors. Each tremor sent people running into open spaces, reinforcing the sense that the ground itself could not be trusted. Despite the devastation, acts of courage and solidarity emerged. Neighbors helped neighbors escape collapsed buildings. Volunteers assisted the injured and searched for survivors. Makeshift shelters appeared in parks and open areas as thousands were left homeless. The earthquake of April 18, 1906, marked the beginning of San Francisco's greatest crisis. Yet the destruction caused by the shaking itself was only the first phase of the disaster. In the hours that followed, a new and even more destructive force would take hold. Fire would soon claim what the earthquake had left standing. In the immediate aftermath of the earthquake on April 18, 1906, San Francisco faced a second and far more devastating catastrophe. While the violent shaking had destroyed buildings and claimed lives, it was fire that would ultimately consume the city. Within hours of the earthquake, dozens of fires ignited across San Francisco, merging into a firestorm that burned unchecked for days. The causes of these fires were numerous. Ruptured gas mains leaked flammable gas into streets and buildings. Overturned stoves and broken furnaces ignited flames in homes and businesses. Electrical wires sparked amid collapsed infrastructure. In many cases, small, containable fires rapidly grew into uncontrollable infernos due to the city's crippled firefighting capabilities. The San Francisco Fire Department was effectively paralyzed. Water mains had been shattered by the earthquake, leaving hydrants dry. Fire engines arrived at burning buildings only to find no water with which to fight the flames. Attempts to draw water from a bay were slow and inefficient. As fire spread, firefighters were forced into desperate improvisation. City officials and military leaders made critical decisions under extreme pressure. Believing that controlled demolitions could create fire breaks, authorities ordered the use of explosives to destroy buildings in the path of advancing flames. However, these demolitions often backfired. The explosions ignited additional fires, scattered burning debris, and widened the destruction. The fire advanced relentlessly through the city. Entire neighborhoods were engulfed. The dense layout of buildings, combined with strong winds, allowed flames to leap from block to block. Wooden structures burned rapidly, while brick and stone buildings collapsed as their interiors were consumed. Downtown San Francisco suffered catastrophic losses. Financial institutions, government buildings, hotels, and theaters were destroyed. The city's commercial heart was reduced to ruins. Warehouses along the waterfront burned intensely, fueled by stored goods and chemicals. Chinatown was among the hardest hit areas. The tightly packed buildings and narrow streets made the neighborhood especially vulnerable. Fires spread with terrifying speed, forcing residents to flee en masse. Thousands were displaced as one of the city's most vibrant communities was nearly obliterated. As fires raged, panic spread among the population. Hundreds of thousands of residents fled their homes, carrying belongings through smoke-filled streets. Parks, beaches, and open areas became vast refugee camps. Golden Gate Park, the Presidio, and the waterfront filled with survivors seeking safety. The U.S. Army played a central role during this phase of the disaster. Troops were deployed to maintain order, assist evacuations, and enforce emergency measures. Martial law was declared, granting soldiers authority to act decisively. Curfews were imposed, and looting was met with harsh punishment. Despite these measures, chaos was unavoidable. Communication remained severely limited. Command structures were unclear. Decisions were made rapidly, often without full information. The scale of the fires overwhelmed any coordinated response. For 3 days and nights, the firestorm continued. Flames illuminated the sky, visible for miles. Smoke darkened daylight, and ash rained down on surrounding areas. The heat was intense enough to warp steel and shatter stone. By the time the fires finally subsided, more than 80% of San Francisco lay in ruins. Approximately 28,000 buildings were destroyed. Entire districts ceased to exist. The city's population was left homeless on an unprecedented scale. The firestorm transformed the earthquake from a severe disaster into a near-total urban annihilation. Structures that had survived the shaking were consumed by fire. Efforts to save the city had failed, not for lack of courage, but because the infrastructure required to fight such catastrophe no longer existed. As the flames died down, survivors returned cautiously to what remained of their neighborhoods. They found landscapes of ash and twisted metal. Familiar streets were unrecognizable. Landmarks were gone. The emotional impact was profound. The firestorm of 1906 stands as one of the most destructive urban fires in history. It demonstrated how secondary disasters can surpass the original event in scale and impact. In San Francisco, fire proved deadlier and more destructive than the earthquake itself. When the smoke finally cleared, the city faced a new reality. San Francisco had not merely been damaged, it had been erased. What followed was a period of chaos, survival, and difficult decisions as authorities and citizens confronted the enormity of the loss. As the fires continued to rage across San Francisco, the destruction of physical structures was matched by the collapse of civil order. With much of the city in ruins, government buildings destroyed, and communication systems disabled, authority became fragmented. In this environment of uncertainty and fear, chaos spread rapidly, forcing city officials and military leaders to impose extraordinary measures. In the immediate aftermath of the earthquake and the subsequent firestorm, tens of thousands of residents were displaced. Families wandered through smoke-filled streets carrying what little they had salvaged. Many were separated from loved ones. Public transportation had ceased to function. Roads were blocked by rubble, and familiar landmarks no longer existed to guide movement. Amid this confusion, reports of looting began to emerge. Abandoned stores, warehouses, and private homes became targets for theft. In some cases, individuals sought food, water, or clothing essential for survival. In others, looting was driven by opportunity amid the absence of law enforcement. The line between survival and criminal activity blurred. City authorities, overwhelmed by the scale of the disaster, turned to the U.S. Army for assistance. Troops stationed at the Presidio were deployed throughout the city. Soldiers were tasked with maintaining order, protecting property, and assisting with evacuations. Their presence was intended to restore authority in a city where traditional policing had become impossible. Emergency powers were granted quickly. Martial law was declared, granting military forces broad authority to act. Curfews were imposed. Armed patrols guarded key intersections, supply depots, and remaining public buildings. Soldiers were authorized to use lethal force against looters, a decision that reflected the severity of the situation and the fear of complete societal breakdown. Eyewitness accounts describe soldiers confronting civilians amid ruins, enforcing order with weapons drawn. Some individuals accused of looting were summarily punished. The absence of clear legal procedures during this period led to actions that would later be questioned, but at the time, maintaining control was considered paramount. Food shortages intensified tensions. With markets destroyed and supply lines disrupted, access to basic necessities became increasingly difficult. Relief efforts struggled to keep pace with demand. Distribution points were established in parks and open areas, but long lines and limited supplies fueled frustration and desperation. Refugee camps expanded rapidly. Golden Gate Park, the Presidio, and the waterfront became temporary cities of tents and makeshift shelters. Thousands slept outdoors, exposed to cold nights and uncertain conditions. Sanitation was poor, raising concerns about disease outbreaks. Despite these hardships, acts of cooperation and resilience were widespread. Volunteers organized food distribution, medical assistance, and shelter construction. Churches, civic groups, and private citizens worked together to provide aid. In many cases, informal networks proved more effective than official channels. Government leaders faced enormous challenges. The city's mayor, along with state and federal officials, attempted to coordinate relief while grappling with incomplete information. Decisions were made rapidly, often under pressure and with limited resources. The priority remained preventing further loss of life and restoring a semblance of order. The presence of the military altered daily life dramatically. Streets were patrolled by armed soldiers. Movement was restricted. Authority rested not with civil institutions, but with uniformed forces responding to an emergency unprecedented in American urban history. As fires subsided and immediate threats diminished, attention began to shift toward longer-term survival. The question was no longer how to stop the disaster, but how to live in its aftermath. San Francisco faced the reality of supporting hundreds of thousands of homeless residents while planning for recovery. The period of chaos following the earthquake revealed both the fragility and resilience of urban society. Institutions failed under strain, yet individuals and communities adapted in remarkable ways. The imposition of martial law underscored the limits of civil governance in the face of catastrophic destruction. By the end of April 1906, the worst of the disorder had been contained. Fires were extinguished. Patrols stabilized key areas. Relief efforts became more organized. Yet the psychological scars remained deep. For many, the experience of chaos and enforced order would leave lasting impressions. San Francisco had survived the immediate crisis, but the city that emerged was profoundly altered. What lay ahead was a daunting task of caring for survivors, assessing losses, and deciding whether and how to rebuild. As the fire subsided and the immediate chaos began to settle, the human dimension of the disaster came into sharper focus. Beyond collapsed buildings and burned streets, the great San Francisco earthquake of 1906 was defined by the experiences of those who lived through it. Survivors' accounts provide a detailed and often harrowing record of how ordinary people endured extraordinary circumstances. Eyewitness testimonies describe the earthquake as sudden and violent, giving little time for reaction. Many survivors recall being awakened by a deep rumbling sound, followed by intense shaking that threw them from their beds. Some reported seeing walls ripple and streets rise and fall as if the ground itself were alive. These descriptions, repeated across neighborhoods, convey the scale of the seismic force. Residents trapped inside collapsing buildings often escaped through instinct and chance. Staircases gave way, doors jammed, and windows shattered. Those who survived frequently did so by moving quickly into open spaces or by sheltering beneath sturdy furniture. Others were not as fortunate. Accounts from rescue workers described searching through rubble for voices, sometimes finding survivors after hours or days. After the shaking stopped, survivors confronted a city transformed beyond recognition. Streets were blocked by debris. Familiar landmarks had vanished. Smoke obscured the skyline. Many people wandered aimlessly, attempting to locate family members or assess the damage to their homes. In numerous accounts, the sense of disorientation was as profound as the physical destruction. The outbreak of fires compounded the trauma. Eyewitnesses described walls of flame advancing through neighborhoods, driven by wind and fed by gas leaks. People fled repeatedly, abandoning temporary refuges as fires spread. Entire communities were forced to relocate multiple times over the course of several days. In Chinatown, residents recounted frantic evacuations through narrow streets as buildings burned on both sides. Language barriers and discrimination complicated access to relief. Many Chinese residents were denied entry to refugee camps or faced hostility from authorities. Despite these obstacles, community networks provided support and assistance. Survivors who reached open areas such as parks and beaches formed makeshift communities. Families slept outdoors under blankets or improvised shelters. Food and water were scarce. Eyewitnesses described long lines for rations and constant anxiety about further aftershocks or renewed fires. Medical professionals documented scenes of widespread injury. Hospitals that remained standing were overcrowded and under-resourced. Doctors and nurses treated fractures, burns, and shock without adequate supplies. In some cases, medical care was provided in tents, open spaces. Personal diaries and letters written in the days following the disaster reveal emotional responses ranging from fear and grief to determination and resolve. Some survivors expressed despair at the loss of homes and livelihoods. Others emphasized gratitude for survival and a belief in eventual recovery. Journalists who entered the city after communication was restored recorded vivid impressions of devastation. Newspaper reports described entire districts reduced to ash, with survivors sifting through ruins for personal belongings. These accounts helped shape national and international understanding of the disaster. The experience of displacement was a central theme in survivor narratives. With hundreds of thousands homeless, daily life became a struggle for stability. Eyewitnesses recalled adapting to new routines in refugee camps, forming communal kitchens, and sharing resources. Children's experiences were particularly poignant. Accounts described confusion, fear, and disruption of normal life. Schools were destroyed or repurposed as shelters. Childhood routines vanished overnight, replaced by uncertainty. Despite immense suffering, many survivors emphasized acts of kindness and solidarity. Neighbors assisted one another. Strangers shared food and shelter, and volunteers organized relief efforts. These accounts highlight the capacity for cooperation amid catastrophe. The eyewitness record of the 1906 earthquake provides more than emotional detail. It offers insights into the behavior of individuals and institutions under extreme stress. Survivor stories reveal how people interpret danger, make decisions, and adapt when familiar structures collapse. As reconstruction began, these accounts became part of the city's collective memory. They were recorded in official reports, personal memoirs, and oral histories, ensuring that the human experience of the disaster would not be forgotten. The voices of survivors transformed the earthquake from an abstract event into a lived reality. Through their words, the scale of loss and resilience becomes tangible. While buildings could be rebuilt, the memories carried by those who endured the disaster would last a lifetime. When the fires finally subsided and the smoke began to clear, the true scale of San Francisco's destruction became visible. What remained of the city was not a collection of damaged neighborhoods, but a vast expanse of ruins. The earthquake and the subsequent firestorm had combined to produce one of the most complete urban devastations in American history. Entire districts had ceased to exist. Downtown San Francisco, once a financial and commercial heart of the city, was reduced to rubble. Banks, offices, hotels, and government buildings were destroyed or left as skeletal remains. Streets were buried beneath debris, twisted metal, and ash. In many areas, it was impossible to distinguish one block from another. Residential neighborhoods were equally affected. Thousands of homes collapsed during the earthquake or burned in the fires that followed. Wooden houses, which had once defined much of the city's character, were especially vulnerable. Rows of homes vanished entirely, leaving only chimneys standing amid the ruins. The waterfront suffered severe damage. Warehouses, piers, and shipping facilities burned intensely, fueled by stored goods and flammable materials. The harbor itself was choked with debris. Commercial activity came to a complete halt, severing San Francisco's role as a major port and trade center. Infrastructure destruction compounded the crisis. Water systems were shattered, gas lines destroyed, and electrical networks rendered inoperable. Streets buckled and cracked, making transportation nearly impossible. Rail lines were twisted or buried, isolating the city from surrounding regions. Public buildings did not escape devastation. City Hall, courthouses, and municipal offices were destroyed or heavily damaged. Schools and libraries were lost, along with irreplaceable records and collections. The destruction of these institutions disrupted governance and education for years. The human cost of the destruction was immense. An estimated 250,000 people, more than half the city's population, were left homeless. Makeshift shelters and refugee camps became semi-permanent communities. Families lived outdoors for weeks or months, exposed to the elements and dependent on relief supplies. Economic losses were staggering. Businesses were destroyed, inventories lost, and employment disrupted. Entire industries ceased to function. The financial impact extended far beyond San Francisco, affecting banks, insurers, and markets across the country. Chinatown's destruction was particularly significant. Nearly the entire neighborhood burned. Thousands of residents lost homes and livelihoods. The disaster intensified existing social inequalities as marginalized communities faced greater obstacles in accessing relief and rebuilding resources. Photographs taken in the aftermath provide stark visual evidence of the devastation. Panoramic images show mile after mile of flattened cityscape. These images circulated widely, shaping national and international perceptions of the disaster and underscoring its unprecedented scale. Environmental damage also became apparent. Fires polluted air and water. Debris contaminated streets and open spaces. The removal of rubble required massive labor efforts and took years to complete. Temporary landfills and dumping sites altered the city's landscape. The destruction forced authorities to confront uncomfortable truths about urban vulnerability. The absence of seismic building standards, the fragility of infrastructure, and the lack of disaster preparedness were laid bare. The city's rapid growth had outpaced its ability to protect itself from natural forces. In the days following the disaster, assessments were conducted to quantify losses. Engineers and officials surveyed damaged areas, documenting structural failures and identifying zones of total destruction. These surveys would later influence rebuilding plans and building regulations. Despite the enormity of the destruction, some structures remained standing. Buildings constructed on solid bedrock and those with more robust designs fared better. These survivors offered clues about how future construction might be improved. The devastation of San Francisco was not merely physical. The psychological impact on residents was profound. Familiar neighborhoods were gone. Memories were tied to places that no longer existed. The sense of loss extended beyond property to identity and belonging. Yet amid the ruins, signs of determination emerged. Survivors began clearing debris, salvaging materials, and planning for the future. The question shifted from what had been lost to what could be rebuilt. The destruction of San Francisco marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. The city that would rise from the ruins would not be the same as the one that had fallen. What followed was one of the most ambitious urban reconstruction efforts in American history. In the months following the destruction of San Francisco, attention gradually shifted from survival to reconstruction. The challenge facing the city was immense. Vast areas lay in ruins. Hundreds of thousands were homeless, and essential infrastructure had been obliterated. Yet amid these conditions, plans for rebuilding began almost immediately. Temporary shelters, initially intended for short-term use, became semi-permanent settlements. Wooden cottages were constructed in parks and open spaces to house displaced residents. These structures provided basic shelter and helped stabilize daily life while long-term rebuilding efforts were planned. Entire communities adapted to new living arrangements, reshaping social life in the aftermath of disaster. City leaders faced critical decisions regarding the future layout of San Francisco. Urban planners proposed ambitious redesigns, including wider streets, improved transportation networks, and more open public spaces. Some plans envisioned a radically transformed city, drawing inspiration from European capitals. However, financial constraints, property ownership disputes, and political pressures limited the scope of these changes. Reconstruction proceeded largely along existing street patterns. Speed became a priority. Businesses sought to reopen as quickly as possible, and residents were eager to rebuild homes. Temporary solutions often became permanent, reflecting the urgency of recovery rather than long-term planning ideals. Building practices underwent significant changes. Engineers and architects studied the failures of 1906, identifying weaknesses in materials and design. New building codes emphasized stronger foundations, reinforced construction, and improved fire resistance. These measures marked an important shift in American urban development. Insurance played a critical role in reconstruction. While many policies excluded earthquake damage, they often covered fire losses. As a result, compensation flowed into the city, providing capital for rebuilding. This influx of funds accelerated reconstruction, but also influenced which areas were rebuilt first. Chinatown's reconstruction became a focal point of political debate. Some officials sought to relocate the neighborhood, using the disaster as an opportunity to reshape the city's demographics. Community resistance and diplomatic pressure ultimately ensured that Chinatown was rebuilt near its original location, though with architectural changes intended to appeal to Western tastes. Economic recovery followed physical reconstruction. Banks reopened, businesses resumed operations, and trade gradually returned to the port. Within a few years, San Francisco regained much of its economic vitality. By the time of the Panama Pacific International Exposition in 1915, the city presented itself as reborn, showcasing modern buildings and renewed confidence. Scientific understanding of earthquakes advanced significantly as a result of the disaster. Studies of the 1906 event contributed to the development of modern seismology. Researchers documented fault movement, ground displacement, and structural damage, establishing foundational knowledge that influenced future research. The earthquake also altered public perceptions of natural disasters. It demonstrated that modern cities were not immune to catastrophic events. Preparedness, infrastructure resilience, and emergency planning gained greater attention at local and national levels. The historical legacy of the 1906 earthquake extended beyond San Francisco. Lessons learned influenced building practices across California and the United States. The disaster became a reference point for urban resilience and disaster response. Commemoration and memory played an important role in shaping the city's identity. Memorials, anniversaries, an historical record preserved the story of the earthquake and fire. Photographs and survivor accounts ensured that the scale of destruction and recovery would not fade from public consciousness. For residents who lived through the disaster, rebuilding was both a physical and emotional process. Returning to familiar streets, now altered or entirely new, required adaptation and resilience. The city's identity evolved alongside its rebuilt environment. By the second decade of the 20th century, San Francisco had re-established itself as a major American city. Though scars remained, the narrative shifted from loss to recovery. The earthquake became part of the city's collective memory, symbolizing both vulnerability and endurance. The Great San Francisco Earthquake of 1906 stands as a defining moment in American urban history. Its legacy is found not only in rebuilt streets and buildings, but in the lessons learned about preparedness, resilience, and the limits of human control over nature. The city that emerged from the ruins was shaped by disaster, but also by determination. San Francisco's reconstruction marked the conclusion of one of the most devastating episodes in its history, and the beginning of a new chapter.